Hey everybody, take a look at the video I just did with Joe Enders from the Red Top Report. Go and subscribe to his channel and check this video out where I go over how to properly criticize the Pope without going too far, and I answer the question whether or not I'm a Popesplainer, as they say. Enjoy.
Overall, analyzing Pope Francis's pontificate, there's some good and there's some bad. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of this pontificate. I think that there are some popes who did worse things. And then number two, I don't know what some of those popes would have looked like in an age of social media. Probably would have been way worse than what we have in the historical record. Let's just make sure that we're not unscrupulously buying into slander against Pope Francis, and that we're properly evaluating his words before we form an opinion and make a judgment about what he says.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Red Top Report. I'm your host, Joe Enders, and yeah, we got another special guest coming on to talk to us today. We're talking about the host of Reason and Theology, the guy that I love watching the videos of whenever I don't know the answer to a question about Catholicism, which is more often than you think. Michael Lofton, dude, welcome. Welcome to Red Top Report.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. It's an honor.
Yeah, no, the honor's all mine. I wanted to talk to you today because I feel like there's this new trend going on in Catholic circles right now. Mm-hmm. And there's this word that I see everywhere. I think it's like a hashtag even sometimes. It's all over the place. It's called Popesplaining. Popesplaining, right. Which is, you know, this idea that, oh, you're just trying to figure out some sort of way to exonerate the Pope even though he's actually doing something wrong. And the reason I wanted to bring you on specifically to talk about this is because I don't think that you are a Popesplainer, but I think that you are often criticized for being a Popesplainer. And I kind of want to talk to you, and this is going to be my first question, about what you think about how to criticize the Pope and how not to criticize the Pope. And I think that's a good jumping off point.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And to answer your question, I'm definitely not a Popesplainer. I do have criticisms of Pope Francis that I express publicly. I try to do so respectfully, but I do have criticisms. So I'm certainly not willing to explain things away when there are legitimate concerns with this pontificate. I can't say that I'm necessarily fond of this pontificate either. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I accurately represent and not misrepresent Pope Francis. One of the big reasons why this actually came on my radar, there's several, but one was, I remember on one occasion, I did a video condemning idol worship, and which is the worship of demons, because the gods of the nations, the idols, are actually demons according to scripture in the Psalms and New Testament. So I did a video talking about that, and I found it odd because right after that on social media, a well-known individual slandered me and said that I was defending demon worship. And I thought that is just so odd, given that I literally just got done doing a video condemning it. Yeah. Why would one suggest that? And so clearly there's a misunderstanding here. And people did not give me the benefit of the doubt and rushed to social media to slander me. And then a bunch of people jumped on it and ran with it and didn't give me the time of day or bother to hear what I had to say. And I had previously respected this individual who did it. And I had to ask the question, well, if I could be misrepresented that severely, I wonder if these individuals, this person and some of the other people that chimed in, I wonder if they're doing the same thing to others, maybe even Pope Francis. And so I took a second look at the situation and some of their criticisms, and I said, in fact, they are. In fact, they were engaging in rash judgment in many instances, just as they had done to me. So it became on my radar whenever I saw people were doing that to me. And I'm just a very small individual on social media. I can only imagine a public figure like Pope Francis worldwide. Everybody comments on every little word that he says publicly. And I said, well, wow, if they could twist me this badly and I'm a nobody, how much more is that a danger for Pope Francis? And in many instances, I looked and I said, yeah, he's being misrepresented. And in other cases, I said, no, he's not being misrepresented. That is a legitimate criticism that we can offer against Pope Francis.
Yeah, and you know, that's a good point. And I want to point some things out here. Like, I don't think I don't even think that. So let's say we had, like a tier list of all the great popes throughout, church history. Pope Francis is obviously nowhere near the top on that. Matter of fact, he's probably closer to the bottom for me than he is to the top. He's definitely not the worst pope we've ever had in human history, but he's definitely not the best either. I would say he's closer to the bottom. And I see him doing things like, pushing a lot of these cardinals into positions of power, trying to remake the College of Cardinals to ensure that the next pope that is elected is another, more maybe progressive pope who believes in more of the progressive church type of deal. I don't mean leftist by progressive. I just mean the idea that we need to move past tradition type of pope. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on specifically people like Father James Martin that he's been promoting, people like Cardinal McElroy, people like Fernandez, who was just put in for this guy's had like 3 names now. Formerly the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, now it's the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure I had that right. So what do you think about all that stuff from Pope Francis?
Yeah, I certainly have some concerns with some of his appointments. I don't think he always has very good appointments, and I kind of wonder, why he chooses some individuals. I think James Martin is a great example of that, because I've done a number of videos that are critical of James Martin, and I've shown some very serious concerns that I think one can have about Father Martin in light of public statements that he's made. And I kind of wonder, well, is Pope Francis aware of these statements? I mean, does he not realize that these statements of Father Martin actually undermine what Pope Francis has said elsewhere? Why appoint this individual when this individual is actually undermining your own magisterium? So then I have to ask the question, well, is he even aware in some of these instances? I don't know. I do know that in one interview, he says he doesn't get on social media. He's not active at all. He has other people who hold his phone for him and will pass his phone to him whenever he needs to take a call, but that's it. So it doesn't seem like he's very well aware of what's going on social media. And I kind of wonder how much have his advisors really told him about Father Martin? And then, of course, when Father Martin goes and talks to him, he's always, I imagine, is going to have his best foot forward and probably is going to push the envelope and say some questionable things. So I kind of wonder, well, how much of this does Pope Francis realize? Because some of the things that Martin is saying undermines Francis's own magisterium.
Of course.
So there's a conflict there. So at the very least, these are bad appointments. I don't know how much awareness he has, however, of how conflicting they are, though.
It's what's so weird to me with Pope Francis is that on the plane. I know this is off cuff remark, and I don't know if he regrets saying or doesn't regret saying it. I'll leave that up to obviously the Holy Father and his conscience. But when he talked about the gay civil unions, he appoints Cardinal McElroy, who's also ardently pro-gay, not just from a off the cuff remark thing, in actual attendance at pro-gay events and stuff. He has just been all about that sort of nonsense in the past. And then you have other people that are coming up too, like I forget who the person he sent to investigate Bishop Strickland was also involved in a cover-up for a very, very notorious pedophile priest in the what was it? The in an Illinois seminary. I believe it was Mundelein Seminary. And I look at the type of stuff. I don't know how. I kind of want to ask you this, because I guess this is my question. How much does the Pope even have a say in all these things? Do people just put documents in front of him and just signs them without knowing what's going on entirely with them? How does that work from a ecclesiology standpoint, I suppose, if that's even the word for it?
Yeah, I doubt very seriously that he's well informed in many instances, because you could imagine how much of a workload he has as Pope. Yeah. And so I doubt very seriously he can personally go and investigate individuals. That's where he has to kind of rely on advisors. And I would certainly say, I think we have a failure here, perhaps with some of his advisors, because I think that that's kind of their business, their duty to properly inform the Pope. And I'm not so sure that they're doing that in all instances. And so I certainly have some concerns there.
Okay, so So, and this, and I want to shift to the good things after after this as well. But the things that I notice about Pope Francis, and this is probably the most profound, I think, of my criticisms, is there has to be some level of accountability, because ultimately, whether he is listening or not listening, there is a duty for him to know. There's a duty for him to know that these things are happening. There's a duty for him to, see that there is a problem, or see that he was misinformed, or find out he was misinformed. There's some accountability that goes there, because I know, like, from a Catholic perspective, that's how hierarchy works. You're responsible for the people under you. So I guess that's probably what I would say is Pope Francis's biggest failure as the Supreme Pontiff, because he's literally got to be utterly oblivious to everything that's going on, and maybe he's got to be utterly oblivious to it to not see what's going on in the background there. And maybe he just is, maybe he isn't, but I feel like there's some accountability there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at his final judgment, if that's not atoned for and repented for, he's got to answer for it.
Certainly, there's a level of accountability there. I don't think that there's any question to that. I mean, I don't know how much culpability there is. Again, it could be that there's a great burden on advisors, but at the end of the day, he does have some level of responsibility to have good advisors and to look into things and double check and make sure that his people are doing the right thing. And so, I don't think that he's excused from all culpability, even if he does have mitigating circumstances such as ignorance as to what is actually taking place feet on the ground. So I certainly don't want to exonerate him of all level of culpability. But I do want to try to maybe mitigate some of the claims of individuals who would see him as actively intending to knowingly destroy the church. And I think that's going a little too far. I don't think that we have enough evidence to determine his motives. And I certainly think it's pretty unreasonable in many instances to make that claim. And so that's kind of what I want to balance out. I don't want to go to that extreme because I don't have enough data to back that up. But I also don't want to go to the other extreme and say, well, he has absolutely no culpability here. Yeah. No, I think ultimately, as the Pope, the buck stops with you, and you do have culpability, and you do have to make sure that you have good advisors, trusted advisors. So if the fault is more with his advisors, well, he has some responsibility with that.
Right. In the words of Jordan Peterson, clean your room. Yeah. And you know what? This is exactly why I wanted to bring you on, because it's like no one knows that you think this. It's like no one knows that you would have this position, and it's a very balanced position. And you're right. Until there's a video recording of him saying, I am actively deciding to destroy the church, or some sort of, compendium of evidence that all leads to that one point of view, you don't, as a layman, have that authority. I mean, it's not there to say those sorts of things. There's this epidemic that I've noticed among, really faithful Catholics, good people, that think that they have the authority to talk up to talk back to their superiors, not knowing whether they're doing something wrong or not, and claiming they're doing something wrong publicly. That's a sin known as, if I'm correct, that would be detraction or calumny.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's something we most certainly have to avoid. In fact, there is something mentioned in the Catechism. I have it actually pulled up here. I'll read it very briefly. Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2478. It says this: to avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret, insofar as possible, his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another statement than condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it. And if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to a correct interpretation so that he may be saved. And what we see from there is we need to be hesitant to just automatically condemn a person and read them in the worst possible way. We have a duty. It is not Popesplaining. One has a duty according to the tradition of the church, and this is also based on scripture, so also according to the word of God, one has a duty to give a person the benefit of the doubt or the judgment of charity, unless it's clear that this person is actually in error. And then at that point, our duty is to, in love, help correct them for the sake of their salvation. Unfortunately, what we tend to do is we're not giving a person the benefit of the doubt. We're immediately rashly judging them. And then even if there is some actual error that the person is engaging in, we often correct them in a way that it doesn't seem clear that we actually intend for them to be saved and we want to help them. Rather, it more looks like we're trying to dunk on them and we're trying to harm their reputation rather than help bringing them closer to Christ. And so that's certainly a duty of ours. But you mentioned, some people don't know that this is my perspective. That's also what I find interesting because I'm pretty vocal about this. What I've noticed, however, is a lot of people don't actually listen to what I have to say. They've just listened to what other people say. I saw a comment earlier on one social media platform where an individual, and I get this every minute of every day, somebody said, Michael hates traditionalists. And I thought, that's such an odd thing to say, given that that's not reflective of me at all. And so I just wonder, well, when people make those kinds of judgments, have they really listened to anything I've said, or are they listening to what other people are saying on social media and such people who are perhaps engaging in rash judgment and slander?
I think that's a lot to do with the social media culture that we have today, because what gets you clicks, what gets you views, what gets you popular, it's basically this this press the button, get your dopamine hit culture that specifically, basically, you're a little bit older than me, so our generation and onward, though, essentially is in this, I got to dunk on this person right away type of thing. Now, I'm not against dunking on people. I want to say that very clearly. I think there's a very meaningful distinction here that when when there's somebody who has flat out embraced the demons, whispering into their ears and stuff, and there's a bunch of other people listening to that demon spewing its garbage out of that person's mouth, dunk on them for the sake of the other souls and for the hope and charity that they have, that hope and charity that they will be humbled and find that their pride is sinful through the humility that you provide by dunking on them. And that's been my consistent position about social media for the longest time, is that you can do it, but you have to do it in an ordered way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. We certainly see in Scripture, the apostles calling out some figures. And then in other instances, we see them being, very gentle and correcting somebody. So it just kind of depends on the situation. But the default position is to avoid rash judgment, to avoid this kind of evil suspicion. Let me suspect everything you say and interpret it in the worst possible way. We have to avoid that because we wouldn't want others to treat us that way. Yeah. And believe me, they can do that. I can tell you personally, people can do that. They can twist your words and have you saying the exact opposite of what you've said.
Oh yeah, I've had that experience. If you're, we had the Salon article back in the day where they just randomly said that I was a racist or something like that, and I'm like, why?
Yeah. This is the problem. And unfortunately, a lot of people will see those claims, they'll take them for granted, and they won't hear you out and hear your side of the story and be corrected and realize that they had bought into misinformation. Now, part of my problem is, though there are legitimate criticisms with this pontificate, I think a lot of our evaluation of this pontificate, a lot of it is artificial, and it's emotionally based. In many instances based on misinformation. If you see a whole bunch of tweets every day or posts every day criticizing Pope Francis nonstop for 10 years straight, and some of those criticisms are inaccurate and are rash judgment and are slanderous, well, if you haven't really thought critically through every one of those things that you've read, you're going to end up coming away with this impression of Pope Francis that is much more severe than it should actually be. That doesn't mean that there aren't any criticisms that one can have. It just means that the criticisms that we tend to have and the impression that we tend to have and the emotions that maybe even are invoked when we hear the name Pope Francis, a lot of that is artificial in nature. It is artificial due to having embraced and encountered all kinds of social media posts, many of which are inaccurate. And that's one of my concerns. I
want to shift gears in this discussion to this, to what I think the main problem with Pope Francis is, I like to say that Pope Francis is almost a reverse Donald Trump. The media wants to love him so badly that they'll make him out to look like a leftist, hippie, social justice warrior in their headlines to the best of their ability, because they just, for the life of them, just want to love a pope for once in their life, because they're always so opposed to them on issues of natural law, and social issues specifically. And, that's why you see them report on when he says something about gay civil unions, which is just an off-the-cuff remark in a plane, but ignores, the bigger stories, like when he said you cannot bless sin in regards to blessing homosexual unions, his reaffirmation that we need to stop the demographic winter and rebuild families. I mean, Pope Francis, on almost every single question about regrowing the domestic church, he has been on the money when it comes to using his pontifical authority. And I feel like a lot of people are missing out on a lot of the greatness of this pontificate because of the left-wing media that just absolutely refuses to popularize and report on anything except things that, a traditional Catholic would hate, that the mainstream secular culture would love.
Yeah, media has a lot to do with it. I mean, as you say, you're going to have your more progressive people in media who are going to try to paint him out to be progressive because they want to move away from the traditional perspective. And so if they can twist Pope Francis's words to that end, they're generally going to do that. And then you have other people who are on the other end of the spectrum, and they're going to rashly judge everything he says and interpret it in the worst possible way, and then interpret it as him dissenting against tradition. And so, we certainly see that. And by the way, in reference to the civil union comments that he made, though I don't really agree with his perspective there on civil unions and the legalization of these unions. He did in that immediate context, say that homosexuality is a sin. But not only that, I sometimes think that even though we may not agree with his judgment on civil unions and the legality of these things, we do have to keep in mind, however, some other things that some of the saints said. For instance, Augustine and Aquinas both maintained that prostitution should be legal. And we might say that's on and walk away scratching our heads. Now, they had reasons for saying it, but I don't know if I would exactly agree with Augustine and Aquinas on whether or not prostitution should be legal in the exact same way that I don't know if I would agree with Pope Francis that in a secular society this should be legal. Now, note he was talking about a secular society, not a Catholic society. I don't know if I would agree with Pope Francis there, but I also don't know if I would agree with Aquinas and Augustine on this point. But if we're going to criticize Pope Francis for this, let's also be consistent and criticize Aquinas and Augustine. And I think in many instances we're not consistent. I try to be consistent across the board, but I think that a lot of us just maybe we aren't aware of precedent for some of these perspectives prior to Pope Francis. And if we condemn the Pope as perhaps a heretic for those comments, we then might end up finding ourselves condemning Aquinas and Augustine as heretics as well. Yeah. So we need to be a little careful there.
Yeah, and that's obvious, and that's obviously true. And I actually do agree with your perspective on that. I just think I've always maintained this for the longest time, that on the question of legalized prostitution, Aquinas and Augustine I think they're just wrong. And that's okay. It's okay that somebody was wrong. And once again, God permits material heresies to exist so we could come closer to the church. Good grief. And that's a beautiful thing, that we can come to the truth through things like material heresies. And maybe if the Pope is just trying to start a conversation, he's trying to start a conversation, and that could lead to, which he's all about dialogue, I know, but
but here's a criticism I have of Pope Francis in these instances. I think that, really early on in his pontificate, it was within the first year, within months, I think, he had that whole interview where he spoke about, who am I to judge? Right?
Oh, yeah.
And we know that was taken out of context. But the problem is, I think he knows it was also taken out of context, and he saw how much, at least to an extent, he saw that some damage was done. Again, I don't know if he knows how much, given that he's not on social media, but I'm pretty sure he was aware to an extent that a lot of damage was done. I feel like at that point, immediately, he should have realized it's probably not a good idea to give these off-the-cuff interviews.
Yeah.
And if one is going to make a statement, it's perhaps best to have a written statement, and a written statement that is prepared in advance and has gone through a theological filter to make sure that there's nothing here that people can really twist. And unfortunately, I don't think he's done that. He's continued to give these off-the-cuff comments, and we've continued to go through this cycle of some of it being misrepresented and then other comments being things that we could legitimately criticize. But we continue to go through this cycle. And I kind of feel like at some point he has a responsibility to know it's not wise for me to continue to put myself in these situations and offer these comments.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I just want to I kind of want to add to what you're saying a little bit, because it seems to me that, you know, there have been popes that would probably do a terrific job speaking off the cuff, and they could probably, you know, slam any debate. And
Sure.
you know, the best debater in the world, you know, they could just slap him in the face with facts and logics, as Ben Shapiro would say.
Sure.
And you know, win the debate right then and there. It seems to me though that Pope Francis isn't that guy. It seems to me that when he's questioned on something difficult that's unpopular, he tries to say it in the safest way possible, and in saying it the safest way possible, what winds up happening is he says something that the progressives can latch onto and completely misrepresent in the mainstream media. But there are still instances, though, even in those cases where his words aren't as misrepresented. For example, when he said that the Eucharist was food for the sick, and right after the whole fiasco with talking about denying Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi communion. I'm not a theologian and I'm not an expert on this, but I'm fairly certain that you need to be pure before you go up. You know, you need to be pure before you go up.
What's interesting about that is Pope Francis has explicitly said, I don't have the quote in front of me, but it is explicit. He has said that if we are in mortal sin, we know we must first go to confession before receiving the Eucharist. And so he says those things, but then I agree, he says other things that I think ultimately undermines those things. And so in those cases, I think that he shouldn't be giving these off-the-cuff statements, rather restrict his comments to things that are filtered and pre-written, because they end up undermining what he said elsewhere.
Thank you. I actually didn't know about that prior statement that he made, and that's actually good news to me, because when that came out, I was like, whoa. No, you repeat. I think it was it McElroy that released that initial statement too. It sounded like he was, you know, building off of when he made that off the cuff remark. I don't know if he was or wasn't, but that started a whole hullabaloo with the U.S. bishops at the time too. It was a huge deal.
And by the way, I have the quote right here. Quote, okay. We know that one who has committed a serious sin should not approach Holy Communion without having first obtained absolution in the sacrament of reconciliation, end quote. And I did verify the authenticity of that in its primary source. It is authentic. And so he'll say those things, but then I think he says other things off the cuff that undermines what he has said elsewhere. Yeah. And in fact, undermines his magisterium. And so it's like you're undercutting your own authority when you do that, because you teach this authoritatively, but then you give this off-the-cuff comment that kind of gives itself the opposite impression. It lends itself to the opposite impression. That undermines your own credibility when you do that. And so I don't think he intends to do that, because he's undermining himself when he does it. But rather, I just think that he needs to be a little bit more careful. And, you know, I don't know if that's going to happen at this point. I think it is what it is.
I was going to say, I don't see him. I see his pontificate. He's at the back end of his pontificate at this point, I would say. And maybe he's not. Maybe he'll live to be 106 years old. Hey, congratulations. But he's getting older now. You know, he's kind of winding down a little bit in his pontificate, and it seems like right now. What it seems like he's preparing to continue on his legacy into the next pontificate. How many appointments has he done? 72 now, I think. Something almost
a lot, yeah,
almost 72.
A lot.
It's been a lot, and it's completely remaking the College of Cardinals from the Vatican II era prelates.
Yeah, it's like 77% or something like that are the cardinals that he's appointed. So, yeah.
So the next question I have, I want to move a little bit away of Pope Francis and talk a little bit more about red top stuff we talk about on red top. I've noticed, at least across the board with specifically younger Catholics. And, you know, I know you are a person who loves reading books. I know you are, I mean, look behind you. So it seems to me though, that many Catholics are too buried into their books, so buried into their books that they're actually unwilling to go out and take any action against some of the degeneracy that we see in the world. I thought that the LA Dodgers protest, for example, was a great thing. It's something that we haven't really seen from Catholics in a long time when it comes to mobilizing against cultural error. What do you think happened to that Catholic masculine spirit, that urge to go out and fight for what you believe in? For example, if a Muslim were to see that the Prophet Muhammad was being drawn somewhere, there would be 300 of them outside raising scimitars in the air and saying, "We need to get them." Not literally, but jokingly. Sure. But and why aren't Catholics more like that, I guess, is kind of my question.
I think a lot of us tend to be nominal in our faith. And so it's not something that we would want to go out and really cause an issue over and be vocal about, because we're already nominal in our faith. But I think for those people who are serious about their Catholic faith, they are the ones who are going to be vocal. They are the ones who are willing to go out and do what needs to be done. Perhaps go to an abortion clinic and pray outside of it, and things like that, or protest. So for those who are serious about their faith, I think we are doing what we're supposed to do. But I think that there's just so many Catholics out there that are nominal, and so why would they go and do those things, especially when it's countercultural? If your faith is merely nominal, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be countercultural.
I'm not speaking about the people that are nominal Catholics. I'm speaking about the ones that call themselves a traditional Catholic. They love going to mass. They love studying theology. They love receiving the sacraments, and they love talking about Catholic masculinity. They dress in their tweed suit. They put in their nice little pipe and smoke their pipe to look more masculine, to channel their inner G.K. Chesterton. But when push comes to shove and they need to be somewhere, they're not there. That type of thing. And it seems to me like there's this, it seems like they're idolizing knowledge a little bit too much. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Have you noticed this even?
I don't know enough to comment on that one specifically. That may be a phenomenon. I'm not saying it's not. I don't know enough to really evaluate that one.
It's more people that are like Ronan's age and up to about my age. So there's like this, I'm 28, Ronan, you're 21. So it's like right there. It's like there's this like nice little renaissance going on in the Catholic world right now, where young people are actually interested in faith again, but they're interested in learning about the faith. But I'm not. I'm seeing less of an interest in them being, I guess, engaged in it. And I often connect that to what seems to be a diminishing sense of masculinity throughout our culture. And we've actually had Dave Gordon on to talk about this one time. He believes that the genesis of that started with first wave feminism and the beginning of the destruction of the American family. I wanted do you think that there is a crisis of masculinity right now in the West?
I've certainly seen a crisis. Absolutely. And there's, I'm sure, some truth to what Dave said there. The breakdown in the family, I'm sure, has caused a lot of that. I certainly agree, and I wish it weren't so. So I'm right there with you and wanting to fight that. Well,
you know what? It was. Is there anything else, by the way, you'd like to add before we cut off the interview? Because I wanna give you every opportunity here. Just let everybody know that you're critical of Pope Francis and you like some things Pope Francis did. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, if overall analyzing Pope Francis's pontificate, there's some good and there's some bad. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of this pontificate, but I also don't know if I would say, as I used to say, that it's the worst pontificate ever. Partly because I think that there are some popes who did worse things, and then number two, we don't know what those popes would have looked like if they had access to social media. In other words, and now I know Pope Francis doesn't have social media himself, but advisors and people like that who can post stuff on social media and who's so accessible. I don't know what some of those popes would have looked like in an age of social media. Probably would have been way worse than what we have in the historical record. I'm not a huge fan of this pontificate, but I also don't think that it's that absolute worst. My biggest concern is let's just make sure that we're not unscrupulously buying into slander against Pope Francis, and that we're properly evaluating his words before we form an opinion and make a judgment about what he says. And then if we are going to say something publicly to correct perhaps a potential error of Pope Francis, you have to do so acknowledging and with respect to the dignity of his office per Canon 212, paragraph 3. We are able to express some of our concerns vocally. We're able to do that on social media even, per Canon 212, but paragraph 3 also emphasizes at the end, but we have to be cognizant and respectful to their office. And so if in the event there's something to criticize, I think we need to remember that. And if we do that, it will cut down on a lot of the confusion that is out there, because unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are leaving the Catholic Church because they see all this stuff. They think that the successor of St. Peter is at war with Catholic tradition and is at war with the Catholic Church. And they think, why am I going to stick around? I'm not going to be in communion with this heretic who worships demons. Why am I going to be here? I'm going to go to the Orthodox. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go to the Muslims. And so they end up leaving. And then what happens is they find the same problems there. And so they continue to just spiral out of control after that. And what I want to do is help people retrace their steps. But we can't do that if we're continuing to fan the flames and engage in slander against Pope Francis and spread misinformation against him.
Sure. And you know, the last thing we'd ever want to see in the church is any further schism than we've already seen over our 2,000-year history. And
it's already here.
It is.
It's already here. We are already seeing it on both sides. I think that we could say that the German bishops are certainly pushing for it, but we're also seeing it with some radical traditionalists, or what I would call pseudo-traditionalists, who are also advocating and pushing for schism. It's already here.
That's a sad moment for the church. I pray that somehow, in some way, that we can all come back together and come back together as a Catholic family. I mean, it's looking at it as, you know, I'm hoping for a prodigal son moment, maybe. You know, that's always what's in my prayer.
Yeah,
it'd be really.
But I don't know if it will happen. I feel like in some instances it's too late. The cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
We have a new Protestant Reformation in front of us, and it's unfortunate. Yeah.
Well, you know what, Michael? It was great having you on. I think we're going to have you on again because we love talking to you. You offer great catechesis. We like doing, Morona, we love doing these catechesis episodes every once in a while. Get people learning about the faith, what it actually means, instead of just having me yell at angry trannies who want abortions. I mean, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice to be able to do that?
Yes, it is. That's right.
Well, all right, Michael. It was wonderful having you on, and it was good talking to you. All right, guys.
Thank
so that's all we got for this episode of Red Top Report. You got to follow us on Instagram. Yeah, you got to follow us on X, Twitter, whatever the heck it's called now. Thanks, Elon Musk, for confusing everybody on Earth. Also, that thing called Threads, where Mark Zuckerberg started his version of Twitter, but nobody goes on anymore because it's lame. And then we also have our channel to subscribe to on YouTube. That's kind of the main thing we do. So hit that notifications bell. And also, guys, hit the notification bell. How else are you going to know when we're dropping new content? And you already know what we're going to do next, because you need to financially support us sometimes too by giving us your money. And you can give us your money by going to buymeacoffee.com. That's buymeacoffee.com. You can do a single donation, or you can do a monthly Joe for only $5 a month. And with that said, guys, that's all we got for this episode of Red Top Report. God bless you.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. See you next time.